Martin Luther King Jr. was born into a world steeped in segregation and injustice. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, the realities of the Jim Crow South were his lived experience. King, the son of a Baptist minister, found his voice through the church. He understood the power of faith and the moral imperative to fight for equality. He excelled in his studies, pursuing higher education at Morehouse College. He then went on to further his theological studies at Crozer Theological Seminary. He was deeply moved by Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance. King's journey as a leader began with the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. The Montgomery bus boycott was just the beginning. King, along with other civil rights leaders, founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, in 1957. This organization, committed to coordinating nonviolent protests against segregation, became a powerful force for change. Under King's leadership, the SCLC organized marches, sit-ins, and voter registration drives across the South. King's unwavering commitment to nonviolence, even in the face of brutal opposition, earned him both admiration and scorn. He was arrested numerous times, his house was bombed, and he faced constant threats of violence. Yet he remained resolute, his spirit unbroken. He believed that unearned suffering was redemptive, that enduring pain and injustice without resorting to violence would awaken the conscience of the nation. His words, imbued with the cadence of the preacher and the passion of the prophet, resonated with millions. His "I Have a Dream" speech, delivered at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, became an anthem for the civil rights movement. King's dream was a dream deeply rooted in the American idea of equality, a dream of a nation where his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were significant legislative victories for the movement. These landmark acts outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. They were a testament to the tireless efforts of King and countless others who fought for justice and equality. Yet the struggle was far from over. As the 1960s progressed, King faced mounting challenges. The Vietnam War cast a long shadow over the nation, diverting resources and attention away from the fight for racial equality. King, a vocal critic of the war, faced criticism from some who felt he should focus solely on civil rights. However, King believed that injustice anywhere threatened justice everywhere. He saw the fight for racial equality and the fight against war as inextricably linked. The rise of the Black Power movement, while sharing the goal of racial equality, differed in its approach. Some within the movement questioned King's commitment to nonviolence, arguing for more militant tactics. King, while understanding the frustrations that fueled this sentiment, maintained his belief in nonviolent resistance as the most effective means to achieve lasting change. He argued that violence would only beget more violence, deepening the divisions within society. By 1968, King was facing a crisis of faith. He had achieved significant victories, yet the road ahead seemed longer and more treacherous than ever. The persistence of poverty, particularly in black communities, weighed heavily on his mind. He began to speak out against economic inequality, calling for a radical redistribution of wealth and power. He believed that true equality could not be achieved without addressing the root causes of poverty and injustice. It was this belief that led him to Memphis, Tennessee in March of 1968. The city's sanitation workers, the majority of whom were black, were on strike, demanding better wages and working conditions. King, seeing their struggle as a microcosm of the larger fight for economic justice, traveled to Memphis to lend his support. He saw in their fight a reflection of his own unwavering commitment to uplift the marginalized and challenge the systems of oppression. On April 4, 1968, as King stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, a single gunshot rang out. The bullet struck King in the jaw, severing his spinal cord. He was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, but it was too late. At 7:05 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. was pronounced dead. He was just 39 years old. The news sent shockwaves across the nation and around the world. Grief, anger, and despair swept through the nation. Riots erupted in over 100 cities across the United States. King's assassination was a turning point in American history, yet even in death, King's legacy continued to inspire. By 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. found himself at a crossroads. He had scaled mountains of racial injustice, leading a movement that awakened the conscience of a nation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 stood as towering monuments to his efforts. Yet the journey towards equality was far from over. King condemned the Vietnam War, calling it a moral abomination. His stance alienated some allies and drew sharp criticism. The Black Power movement emerged, challenging King's nonviolence. They called for a more forceful response, advocating for self-defense and black empowerment. King understood the frustrations but clung to his belief in love as the ultimate weapon against hate. Memphis, Tennessee, in the winter of 1968, became a crucible for King's evolving vision. The city's sanitation workers, overwhelmingly black men, went on strike on February 12th. Mayor Henry Loeb refused to negotiate. King answered their call, traveling to Memphis in March. He delivered a powerful sermon at the Claiborne Temple. A march led by King on March 28th erupted in violence. Despite the setback, King remained committed to the cause. He vowed to return, determined to lead a peaceful march. On April 3rd, King returned to Memphis, a city bracing for another demonstration. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and apprehension. That evening, King delivered his final speech at the Mason Temple. He spoke of death threats and the possibility of an untimely end. I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. The speech became an instant classic, capturing King's message and belief in love and nonviolence. The Lorraine Motel, a modest establishment in a predominantly black neighborhood, became King's temporary home in Memphis. Room 306, with its worn carpets and simple furnishings, offered little in the way of luxury. On April 4th, 1968, King awoke to a day filled with meetings and strategizing. Standing on the balcony outside his room, engaged in light-hearted banter with friends below, at 6:01 p.m., a sharp, piercing sound ripped through the evening air. King, struck in the neck by a single bullet, crumpled to the balcony floor. News of the shooting spread like wildfire, igniting disbelief and despair. Memphis, already a tinderbox of racial tension, erupted in the wake of King's assassination. Grief, rage, and despair washed over the city, a potent cocktail of emotions igniting a wave of unrest that quickly engulfed neighborhoods. The news, a cruel April Fool's joke, spread across the nation, triggering similar outbursts of fury and anguish in cities across the country. The Lorraine Motel, once a beacon of hope, transformed into a scene of unimaginable sorrow. Blood stained the balcony where King had stood moments before, a stark reminder of the violence that had snuffed out his life. Inside room 306, the bed remained unmade, a testament to the suddenness of his departure, a poignant symbol of a life interrupted. As darkness descended, Memphis became a battleground between mourners and militants, their shared grief expressed in vastly different ways. Riots erupted, fueled by decades of pent-up frustration, anger boiling over into acts of destruction and despair. Buildings burned, windows shattered, the air thick with smoke and the stench of tear gas. The National Guard, deployed to quell the unrest, patrolled the streets, their presence a stark reminder of the deep divisions that plagued the nation. Amidst the chaos, King's message of peace seemed lost, drowned out by the cacophony of violence and despair. The dream he so eloquently articulated, the vision of a just and equitable society, appeared to be going up in flames, consumed by the very hatred he had dedicated his life to extinguishing. The wail of sirens sliced through the thick Memphis air, a piercing counterpoint to the stunned silence that had descended upon the Lorraine Motel. The crack of the rifle shot, still echoing in the ears of those who had gathered below the balcony, now gave way to a frantic scramble for answers, for someone, anyone, to make sense of the senseless. As King lay sprawled on the balcony, blood staining the concrete a gruesome crimson, friends and colleagues rushed to his side. Andrew Young, a young aide, cradled King's head in his lap, his own trembling hands desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood. Reverend Kiles, whose dinner invitation, now a cruel twist of fate, knelt beside his fallen comrade, his voice a mixture of prayers and pleas for help. An ambulance, its arrival a beacon of hope in the rapidly encroaching darkness, pulled up to the motel. Paramedics, their faces grim, carefully lifted King's limp body onto a stretcher, his life ebbing away with each passing second. The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance sped away towards St. Joseph's Hospital, its siren a mournful wail that seemed to signal the death knell of a generation's hope. Inside the emergency room, a team of doctors worked feverishly, their every action a desperate race against time. King, his breathing shallow, his pulse fading, clung precariously to life. The bullet, a cruel messenger of hate, had ripped through his jaw, severing his spinal cord and causing massive internal injuries. Despite their valiant efforts, the medical team could not undo the damage. The news, a sharp jolt of disbelief and horror, spread like wildfire across the nation. Television screens, once filled with the vibrant energy of King's speeches, now flickered with the grainy image of his lifeless body being carried into a Memphis hospital. Radio announcers, their voices choked with emotion, struggled to convey the enormity of the loss, their words tumbling over each other in a torrent of grief and disbelief. From bustling city streets to quiet rural towns, a collective gasp of anguish swept across America. The man who had dared to dream of a nation where his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The man who had preached a gospel of love and nonviolence in the face of hatred and oppression was gone, silenced by an assassin's bullet. For Black Americans, the news landed with a particularly devastating blow. King, their champion, their Moses, leading them towards a promised land of equality, had been struck down within sight of the mountaintop. Their grief, raw and visceral, mingled with a simmering rage, a sense of betrayal that the nation they had strived to perfect could unleash such hatred upon their leader. Across the country, spontaneous gatherings formed, people drawn together by a shared sense of loss and disbelief. In churches, synagogues, and community centers, prayers were offered, tears were shed, and the question why echoed unanswered. King's dream, once a beacon of hope, now seemed a distant, unattainable goal, its flame extinguished by the darkness of violence. The shot that rang out from the bathroom window of a Memphis rooming house on April 4, 1968, was not just a single act of violence, it was a deafening blast that reverberated through history, altering American society. It shattered the fragile hope of a nation grappling with its own demons, exposing the raw underbelly of racism and hatred. In the aftermath, disbelief hung heavy in the air. How could a man who preached love and non-violence be silenced by such violence? It seemed a cruel, cosmic joke. As shock gave way to grief, the nation struggled to make sense of the tragedy. Some saw it as a devastating setback for civil rights, a silencing of its most eloquent voice. Others viewed it as a chilling reminder of deep-seated racism. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was more than just the loss of a single life. It was the assassination of a dream shared by millions yearning for a just society. It was a shot that pierced the heart of America, leaving a wound that would take generations to heal. As the nation mourned the loss of its most prominent civil rights leader, a frantic manhunt was underway. The search for King's killer became a national obsession, a pursuit fueled by grief, outrage, and a thirst for justice. The FBI, under intense pressure to apprehend the culprit, launched one of the largest investigations in its history, deploying hundreds of agents across the country and beyond. The investigation quickly focused on a single suspect, James Earl Ray, a career criminal with a history of racism and a penchant for escape. A fingerprint lifted from a rifle found near the crime scene matched Ray's, and witnesses reported seeing him fleeing the scene shortly after the assassination. The manhunt intensified, with Ray's face plastered on wanted posters across the country, and a $100,000 reward offered for information leading to his capture. For 65 days, Ray, a ghost-like figure, eluded authorities, slipping across borders and assuming false identities. He traveled to Canada, then to England, where he obtained a fake passport under the name Ramon George Snide. His ability to evade capture for so long, despite the massive resources deployed to apprehend him, only added to the intrigue and mystery surrounding the case. Finally, on June 8, 1968, Ray's flight from justice came to an end. He was apprehended at London's Heathrow Airport, attempting to board a flight to Brussels. The news of his capture brought a collective sigh of relief across the nation, but it did little to quell the lingering questions surrounding King's assassination. Section 5, Justice or Retribution, the trial of James Earl Ray. The trial of James Earl Ray, held in Memphis in March 1969, was a media spectacle captivating the nation and the world. Cameras were barred from the courtroom, but the drama that unfolded inside was relayed to the public through breathless news reports and televised sketches. Ray, a gaunt and haggard figure, became the focal point of the nation's grief and rage, the embodiment of the hatred that had silenced King's voice. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, including the fingerprint evidence, eyewitness accounts, and his own admission of guilt, Ray's trial was not without controversy. His defense attorney, Percy Foreman, a flamboyant Texan known for his courtroom theatrics, argued that Ray was a pawn in a larger conspiracy, a patsy set up to take the fall for King's assassination. Foreman's strategy, while ultimately unsuccessful, sowed seeds of doubt in the minds of many, fueling conspiracy theories that would persist for decades. Ray, claiming he had been coerced into pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty, later recanted his confession and maintained his innocence until his death in prison in 1998. The guilty plea and subsequent life sentence handed down to James Earl Ray provided a measure of closure for a nation still reeling from King's assassination. However, the speed of the trial, the lack of a jury verdict, and the lingering questions surrounding Ray's motives and potential accomplices left many unsatisfied, their doubts fueling a persistent belief that the full truth behind King's assassination remained hidden. Section 6, Lingering Doubts, Conspiracy Theories and Unanswered Questions. Despite the conviction of James Earl Ray, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. remains a source of intense debate and speculation. Conspiracy theories abound, fueled by inconsistencies in the official narrative, unanswered questions, and a deep-seated distrust of the government's findings. The assassination, for many, became a symbol of a system rigged against justice, a system capable of silencing dissent and covering up its own misdeeds. One of the most persistent conspiracy theories points to the involvement of the FBI and its controversial COINTELPRO program, which targeted civil rights leaders, including King, with surveillance, harassment, and disinformation campaigns. King's vocal opposition to the Vietnam War and his growing focus on economic justice had made him a target of government scrutiny, leading some to believe that the FBI, threatened by his growing influence, played a role in his assassination. Other conspiracy theories implicate organized crime syndicates, white supremacist groups, and even rogue elements within the Memphis Police Department. The lack of a full trial, Ray's recantation of his confession, and the refusal of authorities to release certain documents related to the case have only fueled speculation, leaving many to believe that the full truth behind King's assassination remains shrouded in mystery. While there is no conclusive evidence to support any of these conspiracy theories, the lingering doubts and unanswered questions continue to haunt the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. His assassination, a tragedy that shook the nation to its core, remains a potent symbol of the fragility of justice and the enduring power of suspicion and distrust. Section 7, A Legacy Forged in Blood. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. cast a long shadow over America. His death marked a turning point in the civil rights movement. The dream he articulated seemed to die with him on that Memphis balcony. Yet, even in death, King's legacy continued to inspire. His martyrdom galvanized a new generation of activists. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 outlawed discrimination in housing. King's assassination forced America to confront its own history. The outpouring of grief and outrage served as a wake-up call. Martin Luther King Jr. may have been silenced by an assassin's bullet, but his words, his dream, continue to resonate today. His legacy serves as a beacon of hope. The news of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination sent a shockwave of grief across the United States and beyond. It was not just the loss of a leader, but the loss of a symbol of hope. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. Vigils and memorials sprang up spontaneously across the country. People of all races and backgrounds came together to mourn. Tears flowed freely as speakers recounted King's life and achievements. The collective grief was palpable. In the corridors of power, the reaction to King's assassination was swift and solemn. President Lyndon B. Johnson addressed the nation, calling for unity and calm, urging Americans to honor King's legacy by continuing his work for justice and equality. He declared a national day of mourning. Other political leaders, both in the United States and abroad, expressed their condolences. Senators and congressmen from both parties stood together in rare bipartisan solidarity, condemning the assassination and calling for peace. International leaders sent messages of sympathy and support, acknowledging King's profound impact on the global stage. In the wake of King's assassination, the voices of his fellow civil rights leaders took on a new urgency. Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, and John Lewis, who had marched alongside King, now stepped into the spotlight to carry forward his legacy. Abernathy vowed to continue their work, urging the nation to remain steadfast in the pursuit of equality. Jackson called for unity and non-violence, emphasizing that King's death should galvanize the movement. Lewis reminded the nation that King's dream was far from realized and that the struggle for civil rights was ongoing. These leaders ensured that King's message did not die with him, but instead found new life in the hearts and minds of those committed to the cause. The public response to Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination was immediate and widespread. Across the United States, people poured into the streets to express their grief and outrage. Spontaneous vigils and marches were held in cities large and small, as communities came together to mourn the loss of their leader. However, the response was not entirely peaceful. Riots broke out in over 100 cities, leading to widespread destruction and chaos. Amidst the turmoil, there were also acts of solidarity and support from unexpected quarters, showing that King's message had reached beyond the confines of the black community. The public's response revealed the depth of the nation's grief, the extent of its anger, and the persistent divisions that King had worked so hard to bridge. For black communities across America, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was a devastating blow. King had been more than just a leader, he had been a symbol of hope, a guiding light in the struggle for justice and equality. His death left a void that seemed impossible to fill, a wound that cut deep into the soul of the community. However, King's death also ignited a fierce determination within black communities to continue the fight. In the days and weeks following the assassination, there was a surge of activism and organizing. The message was clear: the struggle for justice and equality would not die with King. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was not just an American tragedy, it was a global one. King's message of nonviolence, justice, and equality had resonated far beyond the borders of the United States, inspiring movements for human rights and social justice around the world. In South Africa, anti-apartheid activists held memorial services and demonstrations in his honor. In India, memorial services were held, reaffirming their commitment to nonviolent resistance. European nations mourned the loss of King, with political leaders and ordinary citizens alike expressing their condolences. King's assassination also prompted international bodies like the United Nations to reaffirm their commitment to human rights and equality. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. sent shockwaves through the civil rights movement, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. King had been the movement's moral compass and guiding light. His death forced a reckoning, a reassessment of strategies, and a grappling with the daunting question of how to move forward without their fallen leader. The movement, already grappling with internal divisions and facing increasing opposition, found itself at a crossroads. Despite the challenges, the spirit of resistance King had ignited continued to burn. New leaders emerged, bringing their own perspectives and strategies to the fight for justice. The summer of 1968, forever etched in the annals of American history as the long, hot summer, witnessed an outpouring of grief, rage, and frustration that shook the nation to its core. King's assassination ignited riots in over 100 cities across the United States, exposing the raw wounds of racism and inequality. From Newark to Detroit, black communities erupted in anger. The National Guard, deployed to restore order, often met the unrest with brutal force, further inflaming tensions. The riots were a stark manifestation of the systemic racism and despair that permeated black communities. The long hot summer served as a brutal wake-up call, exposing the limitations of incremental progress and the urgent need for systemic change. In the aftermath of King's assassination, the US government enacted significant legislation aimed at dismantling segregation and advancing civil rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, passed just days after King's death, outlawed discrimination in housing. The Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, or sex in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. While the passage of the Fair Housing Act marked a significant victory, it represented just one step on the long road towards racial equality. Enforcement of the law proved challenging, and discriminatory practices persisted in more subtle forms. The struggle for true equality would require more than just laws. It demanded a fundamental transformation of hearts, minds, and institutions. Section 4, The Rise of Black Power, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., while a devastating blow to the civil rights movement, also fueled the rise of the Black Power movement, a more militant and confrontational approach to achieving racial equality. The Black Power movement, with its emphasis on black self-determination, self-defense, and cultural pride, offered a compelling alternative to King's philosophy of non-violence and integration, particularly among younger activists who had grown impatient with the slow pace of change. Leaders like Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, and Huey P. Newton rejected the notion of appealing to white America's conscience, arguing instead for black empowerment and control over their own communities. They called for black pride, black institutions, and black economic development, advocating for a separate but equal approach to achieving racial justice. The Black Power movement, while often portrayed as anti-white, was more about black self-love and self-reliance. It challenged the dominant narrative of black inferiority, celebrating black culture, history, and identity. The movement's emphasis on black pride resonated with many black Americans, particularly young people, who embraced the message of self-empowerment and cultural affirmation. While the Black Power movement and King's approach to civil rights differed in tactics and philosophy, they shared the same goal of achieving true equality for black Americans. The Black Power movement, though controversial, forced a national conversation on race and power, challenging white supremacy and demanding respect and recognition for black humanity. As the civil rights movement gained legal victories in dismantling segregation, the focus increasingly shifted towards addressing the persistent economic disparities that plagued black communities. Martin Luther King Jr., in the final years of his life, had recognized that true equality could not be achieved without economic justice, and he had begun to advocate for a radical redistribution of wealth and power. King's vision of economic justice extended beyond simply ending discrimination in employment and housing. He envisioned a society where all Americans had access to quality education, decent housing, healthcare, and living wages. He believed that the government had a moral obligation to address poverty and inequality, not through handouts, but through systemic change that created opportunities for all. The Poor People's Campaign, initiated by King and the SCLC shortly before his death, aimed to bring national attention to the plight of the poor and to demand economic justice for all Americans, regardless of race. The campaign, which continued after King's assassination, sought to mobilize a multiracial coalition of poor and marginalized communities to demand a more just and equitable society. The fight for economic justice, however, faced significant challenges. The Vietnam War drained resources and diverted attention away from domestic issues. Moreover, the issue of economic inequality was more complex and intractable than the dismantling of legal segregation, requiring systemic change that threatened the existing power structures. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. marked a turning point in the struggle for social justice in America, expanding the fight for civil rights to encompass a broader vision of human rights. King, in his later years, had begun to connect the struggle for racial equality in the United States to global movements for peace and justice, recognizing the interconnectedness of oppression and the universality of human rights. King's outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War, his advocacy for economic justice, and his solidarity with oppressed people around the world broadened the scope of the movement, transforming it from a fight for civil rights in America to a global struggle for human rights. His message of nonviolence, love, and equality resonated with people fighting for justice in South Africa, Latin America, Asia, and beyond. The movement for human rights encompassed a wide range of issues, including economic justice, environmental justice, gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, and the rights of indigenous people. King's legacy inspired activists and organizations working on these issues, providing a framework for nonviolent resistance and a moral imperative to challenge all forms of oppression. The struggle for human rights, like the fight for civil rights, is an ongoing process, a journey towards a more just and equitable world. King's vision, though unrealized in his lifetime, continues to inspire and guide activists and everyday citizens working to create a world where all people are treated with dignity, respect, and equality. His legacy serves as a reminder that the arc of the moral universe may be long, but it bends towards justice. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life was tragically cut short. His dream left an unfinished symphony. The gunshot that echoed through Memphis silenced a powerful voice, a voice that dared to challenge the conscience of a nation. His unwavering belief in love, nonviolence, and equality transcended his presence. The dream he articulated refused to die. It lives on in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. More than half a century after his death, Martin Luther King Jr.'s words still resonate with a profound urgency. His dream, though deferred, remains a beacon of hope, a guiding light for those who continue to fight for a world where equality reigns supreme, where justice is not a privilege but a right afforded to all. While significant progress has been made since that tumultuous era of the civil rights movement, the struggle for true equality is far from over. Systemic racism, economic inequality, and social injustice persist, casting long shadows on the promise of a truly equitable society. The dream, it seems, remains elusive, a destination yet to be reached. Yet, even amidst the ongoing struggles and setbacks, King's legacy offers a profound message of hope. His unwavering belief in the power of love to overcome hate, his commitment to nonviolence as a tool for social change, and his unwavering faith in the human capacity for good continue to inspire generations to raise their voices, to challenge injustice, and to work tirelessly towards a more just and equitable future. King's life and work serve as a constant reminder that the pursuit of justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It is a journey that requires unwavering commitment, relentless determination, and an unyielding belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. It is a journey that we must all undertake together if we are to ever fully realize the dream he so eloquently articulated, a dream that continues to inspire and beckon us towards a future worthy of our highest aspirations.